I do want to go ahead and introduce our format. So this is a Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission effort in partnership with resources from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, DRPT. The effort is called the Regional Transit Vision Plan for the Charlottesville area. This is a public meeting which we have scheduled still over this virtual platform. We're still in a virtual space here rather than being in person. However much we really would like to be in person, we're still adjusting to our times. So with this format, given that we've got a little over 30 people registered for this event here virtually, we had to go with more of a webinar format. I did want to provide you a quick overview of this structure and how we plan to get your feedback and engagement throughout this call. So you can use, there's a question function. It should be on your screen. If you're joining by computer, you should have a couple of narrow or thin rectangles on your screen. And if you hit a little arrow next to questions, that should give you a drop down. And there you can enter in questions, comments. We just got a good evening from Stephen Johnson, so we can see who posted it up there. We will monitor the questions for our entire presentation, the whole meeting. And we will hit pause between different segments of this meeting and answer your questions and call those out. We'll also, if you are calling in by phone, you might not have that option showing on your phone, but what we will do is at the end, we will unmute lines and take any additional questions and feedback and guidance. So if you are joining us by phone, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you at the end of this meeting. We scheduled some time there for discussion. We will also, I did want to point out, once we get to that part of our meeting here, a couple things to keep in mind. So first of all, make sure to unmute when we get to that part of our discussion. And then also we have this little hand icon, which hopefully you see on your screen. When you hit the hand, that is raising your hand for us to call on you. So we will have a presentation here first. We're going to pause and pull questions from any questions or comments or feedback we're hearing or seeing on that questions tab. And then when we get to the end, we're going to open it up and have discussion. So very similar to how we would be doing this in person, of a quick presentation and then open it up and start to have a good conversation and hear from you. Most importantly, we do want to make sure that you visit our website. And there we have a survey, and that's really the best way to give feedback on this process. So we have the link there. We will include the link once again at the end, and then someone on our team will include the link and send it on a chat to all the attendees, so you should be able to access that. So that's our format, and I'm going to hand it off to the PDC and their staff to kick us off for this evening.
Thank you, Will. I'm Kristen Jacobs. I'm the director at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. As Will said, this is our Regional Transit Vision Plan first public meeting. It is facilitated by us at the PDC, but with the Regional Transit Partnership serving as the steering committee. As Will told you, it's funded through DRPT, with also there are local matches for Charlottesville and Albemarle County. We're really happy that you guys are here to participate with us tonight. It's really important that we hear your feedback. So I know that this is a really busy time for a lot of people, and I want to give a sincere thank you for giving us of your time, your expertise, your lived experience, and your feedback as we try to steer the vision for transit within our region. There's been a lot of momentum and growth around coordinating transit and cooperating in the region, and we're beginning to see some serious collaboration around looking at some of the most complex issues in the Charlottesville region, such as greenifying fleets, addressing the driver shortage, equity concerns, exploring sustainable fare-free models. So I want to make sure I start by, even though there not necessarily on here, but thanking our service providers for their tireless work during this difficult time for sure, and trying to make sure that they keep the needs and the safety of passengers in mind. We have a very talented team of consultants we're really excited to be working with on this project from AECOM, Jarrett Walker and Associates, and EPR, who are facilitating. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Brule, who's the project manager from AECOM, and then Scudder Wag from Jarrett Walker and Associates, and Will Cockrell from EPR. I'd also like to introduce my team, even if they're not showing right now on my screen, and that is Sandy Shackelford, who's our Director of Planning and Transportation, and Lucinda, who is the lead Senior Regional Transportation Planner on this project. So again, thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate all of the feedback that we're going to receive. And I look forward to the rest of the meeting. On to you, Tim.
Great, thank you, Christine. Again, my name is Tim Brule. I am the project manager for this study. I am a transportation planner with AECOM. And Will, you want to go on to the next page here? I'll go through the agenda. So for today, we'll start off with just a few introductions and icebreaker questions. And really, you know, I want to get you all used to using the question function. So that's really kind of the purpose of those icebreaker questions. Then we'll go on to the background and the purpose of our project. Go over the project overview and our engagement process, kind of where we are in our engagement process here. The results of our transit propensity analysis and our land use assessment, sort of our initial planning analysis, getting into trying to understand the existing conditions out there. And then we'll get into our visioning exercise, really, you know, trying to get, you know, this is the main sort of feedback portion of our presentation, that we'll want to hear about the goals and objectives from you all about transit in the future. Then we'll have a Q&A and debrief and wrap up and talk about the next steps of the project. Next. So here we have the first icebreaker question. So please use the question box. So please just enter your first name and where you live. I'm Tim, and I live in Annandale, Virginia, so not quite local, but familiar with Virginia. I see some responses coming in.
Looks like a lot of folks from Charlottesville and Albemarle.
All right, we'll go on to the next question.
There you go.
So in 10 years, how would you like to get around? And please enter that into the questions box as well. And it might be a mixture of all the above. So, you know, feel free to explain your answer a little bit. Automated vehicle, that's a good one. And I see, yes, we are supposed to be using the question box to answer the questions here. I see a lot of walk and bike, so you know, definitely transit friendly modes. All right, next question. So how did you hear about this meeting? And so again, enter into the question box, and if you did hear about it in another way, please let us know how that was. Let's see, word of mouth, email, through the RTP, email, project webpage, and the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee. Great. So as we'll mention, note that we'll be you know, saving the questions box as our official log of the meeting. So please you know, feel free to keep adding your thoughts, questions, or comments throughout our presentation. At the end of each section, we'll pause to review some of the comments and questions to kind of reflect on what was presented. And also at the end, there'll be another opportunity to verbally speak, or continue asking questions in the question box, and we'll open it up for additional discussion at that time. Great. And I will pass it back to Will to talk about the background and the purpose.
Great, thanks, Tim. So yeah, with background, this really goes back to a few years ago when I was actually at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, when we were doing a year-long study on the 3 different transit providers here in the region. That's Jaunt, CAT, and UTS. And through that year-long process, we looked at the 3 different transit providers and how they work together and how they work with the localities in our region. And through that process, it identified as the main recommendation an informal body that would soon get its own mission and strategic steps of its own, called the Regional Transit Partnership. Now, that group had initial meetings back in 2018, where they had a strategic session, and one of the things that they had identified was the development of a regional transit partnership, and that of a regional transit vision, excuse me. And that vision really started to develop informally through a few vision statements, and then led up to this effort here that started just a few months ago. And as Christine said, this is our first really public meeting using to kick off the engagement part of this process. And so really the intent of this meeting is to introduce the study effort to you, the public, to update you on some initial work and some findings, and also to introduce some high-level, receive some high-level input from you on some of these goal areas as we're starting to draft out a vision statement. There's some steps along the way. These don't necessarily go in a linear pattern. These are overlapping a bit here, especially the second and third phases here. But first off, back in the summer, we focused on assess, and that was looking at existing transit systems. We looked at the land use patterns and policies across the region, and then looked at transit propensity as well. We looked at those bits of analysis, as well as other plans in the area dealing with transit, and identified some potential or draft goal areas, which we are presenting to you here today, where we're in that engagement phase currently right now of soliciting community and stakeholder feedback from you before we move forward to having a more finalized vision and drafting network recommendations that would help to implement that vision moving forward. In terms of our process, as I mentioned, we started in the summer of 2021, so just a few months ago. We had that assessment phase where we've done transit propensity assessment and land use assessment, as well as an initial stakeholder workshop that was not too long ago, actually back on October 7th. And where we are today is moving the bus forward through our process, our first public forum. And so we look forward to getting feedback from you. I do want to emphasize once again, the best way to engage at this time is that, that community survey. So we hope that you visit the project website and visit the survey and provide us with feedback there after you hear some more context and presentation from Jarrett Walker as we move forward with this meeting. But first, let's take a quick pause. Check if we have any questions or comments in the questions box.
I see there's a question from Peter Krebs, which is, what is transit propensity? And that's something I'll talk a little more about in a moment. again, I'm Scudder Wag with Jarrett Walker and Associates. I'm not Jarrett Walker in the flesh, but transit propensity is basically an analysis of demographics, density, and other factors that make it or that affect the likelihood that a particular area would produce a significant number of transit riders. You can think of it as an assessment of the market for transit, but also the needs for transit and how the two intersect. And so we have some details we'll share in a minute from that transit propensity analysis and land use assessment that our team has worked on. I don't see any other questions that have come through. Are there any others?
I don't think so. I think if you want to go ahead and get started on this section, Scudder, that'd be great.
Sure thing. And let me see. I am moving the slides now. Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you again. Scudder Wag, part of the consultant team. Our team has been working on those two documents, the transit propensity assessment and the land use assessment, and those documents are on the website. This map is one of the maps, many maps in those reports that tells you a bit about the planned future growth areas, because this is a vision plan. We're thinking about both the needs and markets for transit today, but also for the next 20 plus years into the future. And so thinking about where future growth is going to happen and what form it takes, because that's an important aspect, is a piece of the puzzle, and thinking about how transit might be able to serve your community today and for the long term. We've also been looking at the other factors, such as, sorry, try to see if the slides will advance. There we go. Where is transit today? The coverage of transit service today. This map is looking at the entire urbanized area of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, which is that darker red boundary, and the fixed route services that are within the urbanized area in the blues and the greens, and then the brighter red lines showing you jaunt commuter services that extend outward, primarily outward from Charlottesville into Albemarle County and to some of the adjacent counties. The analysis of those, looking at how many people have access to service and where and how much, shows you, of course, that right now the vast majority of transit service and availability of service is in the urbanized area, and obviously concentrated primarily in Charlottesville and the immediate developed environs of Albemarle County. The jaunt commuter services extend out into some of the surrounding counties, and Greene, Louisa, and others have some on-demand services as well that serve circulation internal to each of the counties, and sometimes occasional trips going into Charlottesville to help connect people to destinations and needs within Charlottesville. This map is showing you a bit more detail on that fixed route network within Charlottesville proper. And the really important piece of the puzzle here that I want to highlight is that this map is showing you the frequency of service, with the darker blue line showing you routes that are every 30 minutes or better, the lighter green line showing you frequency of service about every 60 minutes, the tan lines less frequent than every hour. And then the trolley service, which you might barely be able to see alongside some of the other lines, is the only thing that normally runs every 15 minutes or better. So the most frequent service in the region. And this is really important because the frequency of service tells us a great deal about the potential usefulness of the service for most trips that most folks want to take, and the likelihood that people will find trips that are useful. There are some corridors where the combination of multiple routes means that the frequency is a little better than the individual routes by themselves that are shown on this map. But even in those cases, the frequency is generally not dramatically better than every 30 minutes or maybe every 20 minutes when you combine all the frequencies of different routes. So this is one of the critical things as you think about the vision for transit in the region, is that frequency of service being today very limited and therefore plays a significant role in why it's pretty hard to get around by transit. One of the key things we want to highlight about what the transit propensity assessment and land use assessment raise is that while there are a lot of technical things in those documents that tell you a lot about land use, ultimately what is going to drive this vision is the community's priorities and goals. And a key thing that we want to note is that transit's often asked to meet a lot of different goals. Make sure everyone is near some kind of service, get people out of their cars, get people to jobs in a reasonable amount of time, support dense and walkable development, reduce congestion. And the challenge we face as we develop a transit vision is that these goals are sometimes in conflict with each other, so that if we are focusing more on one goal, we're focusing less on another goal. Or as you invest more in one goal, and that means you are not advancing a different goal, because focusing on one of these goals will mean doing a certain kind of thing as you're designing a network. And a basic thing I want to make sure everyone comes to this process with is understanding the geometry of why that is the case. So imagine this is you or your friend or any person somewhere in the Charlottesville region. We'll call her Jane. She's in the middle of a city, a county, a region with lots of possible destinations, lots of places that she might like to go. This bubble, this gray area, is where she can get to in 45 minutes. In transit or transportation jargon, we would call this her mobility, because this is how much space she can cover in that 45 minutes. But most of us don't care purely about the area and mobility and that we can reach. We really care about getting somewhere. So her access to jobs, to shopping, to educational opportunities is all of those things that are within that gray area. And so that access tells us an enormous amount about how free Jane is to reach all of the opportunities in the region. So when we're asking this question about where can you be soon, we're asking the same question as where could you reasonably work or play or study or shop or worship. We're asking basically how free you are. And so this one example I'm showing you, one of many examples that we could calculate for the region, is showing you from the UVA hospital, which is at a point in the Charlottesville region where you have probably some of the best transit access that you could have today, given the way the network is designed, how far you can get in 45 minutes in the reddish zone on this map. And this accounts for the waiting time for transit, the riding time, the walking time for getting to the bus to start with, anytime you have to transfer between routes, all of those factors, how far could you get? And you can see on the map, you cannot get that far. You cannot get that far north. You can't even get to Pantops in 45 minutes by transit, for example, from one of the most transit rich areas of the region today. And so this is very, very limiting in the potential for transit to be relevant to a lot of people's lives, a lot of people's trips, that it takes so long to get anywhere, even in the most transit-rich portion of the region today. And if we want to improve that condition, improve access for lots of people, we know how to do that. There's a very clear recipe in transit investment and design, and that is frequent service, so you have short waits, that's reasonably fast and reliable, comparable to the other options, and available when you need it, meaning that it's running into the evening, it's running on weekends, it's running when most people need to go places. So if service ends at 6 p.m., that's going to not be very useful for a lot of people. People working service jobs, people working in hospitals, people working even in office jobs where you may have to work, past 5 or 6 p.m. on an occasional basis. All of those things focused where there are the most people and activities, so that we put that most useful service near the most people, is how we maximize access for the most people as effectively as possible. And the reason I focused on frequency at the start here is that high frequency means public transit is coming soon, and it has 3 independent benefits. It means less waiting when the vehicle is arriving, when you're waiting for the vehicle to come and pick you up. It's easier connections when 2 routes cross each other. If they're every 60 minutes, you may have a very long wait. If they're every 15 minutes, you have a pretty short wait when you're trying to transfer. And then reduce impact from disruptions. If anything were to happen to the vehicle you were riding, if there's another one coming in 5, 15, or 10 minutes, then it's a pretty short wait. It's automatically a backstop on reliability. And frequency is something that's hard to explain if you don't use transit very often. It's not a very obvious thing because you don't have to wait for a vehicle to arrive if you ride a bike or you drive a car. So imagine there's a gate at the end of your driveway that only opens once an hour. Or if you bike a lot, if there's a lock on your bike that only opens once an hour. That's the experience of waiting for an hourly bus route. You best be ready to go when that gate opens. And if you're not, you have a very long wait and you're going to be very late for work probably, and you do that 2 or 3 times a month, you will probably not have a job. So frequency is really critical, but frequency is expensive. If you go from a 30-minute service to a 15-minute service, you need twice as, on a particular line, you need twice as many vehicles to run that service, but most importantly, you need twice as many operators to run the service. And most transit cost is the cost of labor to operate service, year in, year out, day after day, day after day, ad infinitum. So when we're thinking about how can we serve the most people most effectively and most cost effectively, and provide the most access with that frequency, we then have to start thinking about how to reach as many people as we can with that service, and therefore are going to the most dense places first. Because in this example, if we're spending 2 buses to get reasonably frequent service on this line, in the upper example, there are twice as many people and twice as many jobs around that line. So around every single stop, there's twice the market potential of people that might ride service. Everyone in the lower diagram, we're not saying that they're bad people, we're just saying there's fewer of them. And therefore, if we're spending the 2 buses, it is more effective in terms of improving more people's access when we spend those 2 buses in the higher density area. And when we look at the density of the region, we can see that the residential density on the left is quite high in Charlottesville, in the immediate built-up areas in Albemarle, around Charlottesville, north along the 29 corridor, in Albemarle up towards Ruckersville, you still have somewhat moderate density pockets, and out towards Crozet, and a little bit to the southwest, or excuse me, the southeast, coming out of the Charlottesville immediate area towards Louisa and some of the other outer counties. So this is the residential density pattern. The job density pattern is even more concentrated than that, with jobs pretty heavily concentrated in Charlottesville, Pantops, and north along the 29 corridor. Walkability is another really critical factor. 2 stops on the left diagram. In the upper left, you see connected street network, meaning from a single stop, if you're walking a quarter mile out, which is about the average that people would be willing to walk, then the circle flying distance, you can see on a connected street grid, you can reach almost all of that circular flying distance along the street grid. The lower example disconnected street grid, you can't reach nearly as far. So if both of those areas are the same density, the lower diagram, just you can reach fewer people within the reasonable walkshed of that stop. You've also got to be able to cross the street safely. If you have a bus stop in a place where you can't safely cross the street, you basically have service in one direction, which means you could get to work, but you can't get home, which is obviously not very good. Or you could get to the grocery store, but you couldn't get home with your groceries. This is not very good for people's access. And we've analyzed that street connectivity factor that I just talked about in terms of walkability. But that is not the only factor. There's a whole lot of other qualitative factors and street safety factors that come into this. But at least at a street connectivity factor, the older built up portions of the region tend to have better street connectivity than the more suburban, newer post-World War II type developments. And then linearity is another critical factor. If you can run in straight lines with the destinations that people want to reach being on those straight, direct corridors, then you have a very fast path, you have a very efficient path, and people feel like they're going in the direction they want to go when they're on transit. If you have an office park a half a mile back from the highway on a cul-de-sac, or a shopping center behind a half a mile of parking, or a residential area with apartments back off of a cul-de-sac a mile back off the main road, to actually reach those destinations, you've got to deviate your service off the main road and back, and off the main road and back, and someone going from their house to the office park will feel like they're constantly being sent out of their way. It also just takes you longer to serve all of these things, which means if you spent one bus to make this service useful on the top part, you may have to spend two to get the same frequency in the lower half of the diagram. So when we design a transit network to maximize access, and we focus the frequency on those types of places, that meets a lot of really useful goals that people often want transit to do. It maximizes access to economic opportunity for most people and personal freedom. It maximizes the value in investments in walkable development and walkable redeveloped areas, and generally does the most to improve the functionality of the city and the region by making it easier for people to get to jobs, to improve connectivity for all the kinds of economic activities people want to engage in, all the social activities that people want to engage in, for as many people as possible, but obviously not everyone. So if maximizing access is what you want, that leads you in a certain direction of how you invest in transit and where you invest in transit. And that therefore raises a question of, is that what you really want to do? Because some of these other goals on that slide that I just had up there don't necessarily lead you in the direction of maximizing access. So you can think about this challenge in the way of this fictional town on the right here. And if you had 18 buses, and if all of you on this call were the town board, and I was your transit planner, and all of these, and you were telling me what you wanted, and all of these dots were people and jobs, and all of these gray lines were streets that we could run buses on, and you said, yeah, I think we want to maximize access. I think that's the goal we want to do. That would lead me to design something like the network on the right. This network gets most people and jobs, about 70% of them, and it's got 2 routes. And because we're putting 9 buses on each of those 2 routes, there's a bus coming every 10 minutes. And so getting from the south end of the main road here on Route B up to Route A and transferring, very short wait when you're waiting for the Route B, very short wait when you're transferring to Route A, and you can get across town to 70% of people and jobs very quickly. And that means for most people, we have really maximized their access, which means a lot of people find the service useful, which means a lot of people ride it, which is why we often call this a ridership maximizing network relative to cost. And it gets the most people possible out of their cars relative to how much you're investing in service. But Mrs. Jones down here in the bottom right-hand corner might say, hey, this is not fair. I pay taxes too in this town. Why do I not get any service? And I, as your transit planner, would say, well, that's not the goal we've been asked to maximize here. The goal we've been asked to maximize is access for most people, but not necessarily everyone. If you came back and said, well, we need to make sure that everyone has a little bit of service, I would say, well, that's great. That's a different goal. And that would lead me to design this network for you. This network provides many routes. There are about 10 routes on this map. With only 18 buses, then we can only put 1 or 2 buses on each route. Each route's only coming maybe every 40 or 60 minutes. You have long waits to transfer. You have long waits when you're first trying to get the bus. And therefore, far fewer people find this service useful. But because we've stretched our resources across more routes, we cover more territory, almost everyone has a bus stop near them. And so we've provided some baseline access for as many people as possible, that lifeline kind of access. And we have met that coverage goal that you came back and told me was more important after hearing from other people in the community. This is also a network that does the most to spread resources across electoral districts or across every town in a county or a region. And so therefore we call it a coverage goal. Ultimately, these are different goals that lead you to design different services in different ways. And the key thing I want everyone to understand is that normally everyone says both of these goals are really important. And I completely understand that. The challenge that we face as your technical transit planners is that if you tell us both are important and you tell us to spend every dollar you have maximizing both goals, that is like you sitting in the back of your taxi and telling your taxi driver to go left and right at the same time. It's physically impossible. So the way we encourage people to think about this is that both of these goals may be important, but we need to think about how you split your budget between them. And so if the region wants to invest significantly more in transit in the future, how much of that investment needs to go towards maximizing access and ridership, and how much should we be thinking about going to coverage-oriented services to spread something around to as many people as possible? And that's a key question that we want to make sure everyone thinks carefully about as we're working through this process. Now, I've talked a lot about fixed route services, and there might be a lot of you who are saying, hey, we've got on-demand services out here in Louisa County or in Nelson County or in lots of places. What role do those play? Can't that help us resolve this problem? This geometric challenge is a challenge no matter what kind of tool you use. And so you can think about the range of transit tools running from local fixed route bus services, where you have set schedule, set stops all the time, to things like deviated fixed route services, meaning you run on a regular fixed route, but sometimes you deviate off at request. That's another type of service that's a little bit more flexible. Or demand response services that say, within this zone, we will pick you up and we will take you to the downtown transfer center or to this shopping center to transfer to a fixed route that goes somewhere else. To door-to-door demand response services that say, within this zone of this town, say Crozet, we will pick you up and drop you off anywhere within that zone. You can call and we'll pick you up. This is kind of the spectrum of possibility of tools, and how that relates to this ridership coverage trade-off is that the tools towards the left end of the spectrum mean we can get more riders per service hour or more riders per cost is just physically possible. And fewer riders per service hour are physically possible the more you are on the right side of this diagram. And just some examples of what we mean by that is fixed route services tend to see something like as much as 60 riders per hour of service we put on the street. Door-to-door fully demand response services at most can get about 6 riders per service hour. So there's an enormous gap in the capacity potential between these tools. When you look at fixed route bus services around the country, the kind of lowest level of productivity that most communities are willing to invest in is between 5 and 10 boardings per service hour, because at that point, the cost is $20 to $30 or more per rider. The national average is about 28 boardings per service hour. So that's a very, very low floor in terms of, or ceiling in terms of the productivity that these on-demand tools can reach, which means they are generally tools that are used in places that naturally have low demand, which is places with low densities, which is why you see Jaunt using these sorts of tools in more rural areas. So in more rural areas, you will see fixed routes with deviations on request, demand response zones with along corridors or door-to-door type services in the rural context. In the rural context, then, the tools that are less demand responsive or are more fixed are the things that are a bit more ridership focused, and the fully demand responsive type things are the things that are more coverage focused in general. Ultimately, the important thing I want everyone to take away from this is that obviously there's a wide range of land use and potential transit demand across the region between the urban, the suburban, the small town, and the fully rural portions of the region. And this ridership coverage balance is, you're going to use different tools in different parts of the region given that big difference in demand. Each jurisdiction today basically decides how much it wants to invest in transit. And therefore, this thinking about ridership versus coverage balance is something that should be considered at each community's level that they're investing in. So Albemarle, Buckingham, Charlottesville, each of them can make a different level of balance of investment decision here. If there were a full regional funding source that all the localities were paying into, you might then start thinking about what's a regional ridership versus coverage balance in your budget that you're spending. But today, since this is a more locally focused decision, then that is the place that's most logical for thinking about how you budget between these two goals. So with that, I think actually I should stop there. That was a lot of background context on some of these trade-offs and some of these challenges in the trade-offs between priorities and goals that we all may want us to achieve. And I think we have a moment to pause then and answer questions, right?
That's right.
Scudder, there are a couple related questions regarding mode and how different modes can address different goals. So are there different solutions that hit different parts of the mission, e.g. one mode for frequency, one mode for coverage?
So by mode, I'm going to assume we're talking about fixed route services versus more flexible on-demand services, presumably.
Mr. Krebs, this was from Peter Krebs, and he says he thinks the question was answered.
Okay.
So, Mr. Krebs, if you have any other questions, please type in the question function, and we'll address that if you want more clarification. This is a comparable question. This is only, your discussion is only for a town that utilizes buses. How about high-speed rail? And again, I think that's how do different modes address the coverage issue, ridership coverage issue?
Yeah, so high-speed rail is something that there's very limited availability of that in the U.S. in general. It's really only one corridor in the Northeast today that has high-speed rail. There are other types of rail, light rail transit, commuter rail type transit, or heavy rail type transit that different communities use in different ways across the country. The primary value that rail investments get you is significantly higher capacity. So the way I like to frame this is, if you are running a high frequency bus service with articulated buses, meaning those bendy buses that are 60 feet long, if you're running on a corridor and you're running that kind of service with every 5 minutes and you're full all the time, that's a corridor that's an obvious place you would want to invest in rail, because you are reaching the maximum limits of the capacity of the vehicles of what buses can do. Light rail vehicles, for example, can easily carry 200 plus people in a car. So that's the big value you get out of rail, is that capacity. And right now, I don't think there is a corridor that you've got a proven capacity need for that kind of investment in the near term. Doesn't mean it might not be possible in the long term. But the best case to make for a big rail investment is having that kind of frequency and high utilization.
Just very briefly, more comments than questions. Mr. McDermott, as you were describing the services in the region, Scudder, Mr. McDermott mentioned, don't forget the new Afton Express from Afton into Charlottesville. And then Mr. Weaver said he was confused. He's a rider and was confused that we had 30-minute frequencies on Cherry Avenue. He says he's never experienced a 30 minutes frequency based on his riding experience. So more comments than questions.
We can double check that, make sure. And I think also I should clarify, I think the map is intended to show pre-pandemic service levels. I know many agencies are, including CAT, I believe, have adjusted schedules during the pandemic. And I think I see a question, as I have pulled up the question box on my end. Could a mode change throughout different times of the day? For example, fixed with deviation that then becomes an on-demand. And yes, that is one way of approaching it. In fact, some communities will, particularly later in the evening and late night, will transition, for example, from fixed route service to on-demand. Because ridership will start falling off 8 or 9 p.m. rather significantly, and it is perhaps more cost effective to run some or all services as an on-demand to at least provide something till 11 p.m. or midnight or whatever is considered the ending time in that community. So there is the ability to switch modes. The one downside to switching modes is it becomes more confusing for riders if they don't understand how, okay, I got to work on the Route 6 isn't running anymore, do I have another option? And so doing that kind of switch very often, so if you were to try to make that switch in the middle of the day and then come back, it starts to become very confusing for riders. There's a certain amount of simplicity to the reliability of knowing that service is there for me most of the day, most of the weekend, et cetera.
That was all the questions, so we can move on.
Okay,
Right.
great.
I do want to say it looks like Mr. DeCampos Lopez has his hand raised.
Okay.
Maybe we could unmute, see if he does have a question, or maybe that's.
Sure, I just unmuted you.
Hi there. Can you? It was another question. It was from the poll period. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, no problem.
No worries.
Lower your hand on our side. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to our next segment, and we're looking at on the next few slides more of a visioning exercise. Give a little bit of a background on a vision statement that the Regional Transit Partnership had drafted in 2018, as well as set up some feedback from you now that you've heard from Scudder and his presentation, which really I think lays out a great context and background to how we look at goals and vision for the transit in the area. We're going to have a few questions for you, and we'd like to get some responses. So be ready in the next few slides for that question and comment box there. But first of all, I did want to review a draft vision statement that the Regional Transit Partnership came up with in 2018. As I mentioned, they had a strategic planning meeting at that time. It was really a meeting to help organize this new group. It has representation from the transit providers as well as the localities in the area. And that retreat, they had identified some next steps, and one of those next steps included this regional transit vision process that we're working on now. But while they were in the retreat, they did come up with a draft vision statement. This did not include public engagement. It was not vetted through a process. It was just some initial thoughts that they had that would then lead to this process that we're in here. So it was that Charlottesville region's transit system should be efficient, high quality, integrated regional network of transit services that provides all residents with access to employment opportunities in a way that minimizes congestion and maximizes the region's reputation as the best place to live, work, play, or work, learn, and play. So you see a few themes in here of access came up, some implying coordination and how transit is integrated into land uses and decisions regionally as well. And so looking at this and also looking at several other transit planning documents in the region, the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle, and others around the area have been active with planning throughout the year. So we worked with TJPDC staff to identify some other themes that have arose through those other processes. And we outlined just a few of these points coming up on the next slide here, but really went to, starting with, we had a stakeholder meeting back on October 7th, and then here tonight with you, starting to vet through some of these goal areas. We're trying to, once again, just some context, we're trying to establish a new vision for transit in the Charlottesville area. It reflects collaborative, inclusive, and equitable process that represents needs in both urban and rural areas. So this should be aspirational, so not yet implemented, but it would help set the foundation for next steps and implementation going forward. So that's what we're trying to get to here. So some initial goal areas, we'd identified 8, and we're going to go through these a few at a time, and I'm going to ask some questions on these next few slides here. And the questions are, if you would rate this as one of your top 4 of the 8, so one of your these are all priorities, but one of your higher priorities on the top half. Another one is going to be whether you feel like that you support this goal overall, and then what's missing. Is there anything here that we're missing so far in terms of some of these goal themes or these goal areas? So we have 8 so far listed as just a draft and starting point. The first one being enhance, so provide high quality and high frequency transit options. As mentioned, that came out of that draft statement from 2018. Another goal area is expand, so expand the region's transit service to more neighborhoods, towns, and places, and increase basic transit connectivity. So, so a high quality network, an expanded network. The next goal area, number 3, is connect. So promote efficient and attractive multimodal connectivity for seamless regional travel. So being able to access the transit system and have the transit systems interact with each other in a seamless way, that connectivity. Improve equity, so improve transit access for people with low income, limited physical mobility, and who might lack access to automobiles. So these might be more of what we'd call the transit dependent riders. The next one, number 5, is grow equitably. So create a strong linkage between transit and land use, so compact, walkable land use patterns. So really trying to have transit integrated as a core consideration with land use decisions in the localities. Number 6 is collaborate, so improve internal and external communication with transit agencies. So again, it's focusing on having the transit agencies work together and working with the localities in a collaborative way. Number 7 is support, so enhance the region's economy and economic well-being. So that is more focused on more of an economic aspect, that goal. And then number 8 is sustainability and climate, so minimize the environmental impact of the region's transportation system. So these are 8 goal areas. I'm gonna break these down into a couple of groups here. So again, we'd like for you to use the question box there that you have on your screen. And we have these questions here. So first of all, you saw the 8. And so are any of these 3 here, we'll start with the top 3 on the list of enhance, expand, and connect. Are any of these 3 in your top 4 or top half of that list? Do you agree with these goals? And what's missing? Is there anything missing here from these goal areas that we have listed here? We're going to use the question box for now. And what we're going to do is use that for now. We'll respond and we're going to record your responses here. If you think that these 3 are kind of your top half highest priorities, you can just type the titles in and enter it into the questions, and we're going to track those. We have a table here where we're tracking responses. And then, as we mentioned on just a few slides down, we're going to open it up and unmute lines and have more of a discussion. But before we get into that, just want to see what you all think. What are we missing here? What do you agree with, and what are your top priorities? Enhance. Several people listed enhance as in their top 4. Okay. Enhance and connect, okay. Connections is key, Lee said, to both enhance and expand. So that is true of, these are also connected. So some of these areas here. Jane said, yes, enhance, connect. And not sure what might be missing. So that's good to hear that we're catching some of the issues here with these draft goal themes. Amanda said, agree with all, but it is important to focus on the limited resources that are available. And I think, Scudder, I think that's definitely a point to hit home for sure throughout this process that we've talked about. Is I think that's, with unlimited resources, you can do many different things, but really trying to prioritize what are the most important areas with the resources that we have.
I was muted, pardon. Yeah, it's interesting to see a lot of people highlight enhance. That implies, a significant focus on investment in maximizing access for the most people and investing in, frequency as a top priority for at least the folks here this evening.
Yeah. Heard, given what was mentioned before, expand could conflict with our goals.
And I think the way I would describe it is ultimately, if we're asked to enhance and expand with the same dollar, that's impossible. But if we have $10, do you want to spend 5 on enhance and 5 on expand, or do you want to spend 8 on enhance and 2 on expand? Is a way to think about kind of that, how that affects the priorities of these goals, that geometric trade-off.
Yeah, so the system should focus on increasing the number of riders, not just the number of rides. Okay, yeah. So not just the number of rides, but the number of actual riders, or people who are using the system. And enhancement dovetails with zoning and housing issues. And that really is, transportation and land use are two sides to the same coin. You really can't pull them apart. And again, Scudder, I think what I like so much about your slides too is making that point of looking at densities and how the transit system interacts with that too.
Right. The other thing to think about, of course, as we're developing a transit vision that responds in large part to the way the region is built today and the projections and plans for what it will look like in the future. But ultimately, the region can change its plans and its projected growth path. It has some levers to do that and policies to do that. And so this vision, of course, will hopefully be updated in 5 or 10 years. And if the region and its counties and cities have decided to adjust your plans and policies to be more transit supportive, that will go a long way to reinforcing some of the goals that you all are helping to craft here in this vision plan. The two go hand in hand, and in some ways are kind of a constant dance.
This is a really interesting comment. For me, enhanced needs to mention enhanced bus stops, sidewalks, bike lanes, and crosswalks.
Definitely. All right, so let's go on to the next one. So I have these two included. So would either one of these two be in your top 4? So again, we have improve equity. This one, the top one, I will say during the stakeholder meeting on October 7th, this one did get a lot of focus from participants there. We had really good turnout there at that meeting. A similar size crowd there. So that one certainly came up a lot. And then kind of what Mr. Lopez was saying there on the question box of expand needs to include sidewalks, walkability. You could argue also with land use as well. So I think this one hits on some of those themes. So grow equitably. Folks are highlighting that. Equity, seeing that one pop up as a top. These are definitely a priority, Mr. Lopez says. Is there anything missing too? So not only just the themes, but also of how we've worded these as well. Is there some nuance? Is there a component of these goals that we've missed that we need to consider? And no problem if not quite sure yet. We still got a few more slides, and we'll have some discussion here, and we can talk about it. But this is just initial takes. Amanda, it said yes, equity. Priority must be given to those who don't have the luxury of transportation alternatives. Unfortunately, those individuals are often living in a more fortunately, those individuals are living in the more dense urban areas. Yeah, it's really those areas that do help to provide an increase, not just in the ridership, but in riders as well, as we mentioned earlier. Mr. Lopez said, for more equity, routes should favor more dense neighborhoods. Scudder kind of adding to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, historically, lower income people have generally been more concentrated in urbanized areas. We have seen a challenge of rising housing costs in urban areas in the last 10 to 15 years have created a suburbanization of poverty challenge in a number of communities. And I know Charlottesville hasn't been immune to that problem. And that has, in some respects, reduced the transit access that many lower income residents have, because they may have been forced to move from a place that is reasonably transit accessible to less so. And so there are transit solutions that can help solve that problem by expanding service, by improving the frequency of service in more suburban areas, but also that comes back to the land use interactions of affordable housing availability in the region as well. And then investments in transit in single family neighborhoods obviously gets right back to that density slide I was showing of generally serves far fewer people than transit that's serving apartment complexes and townhome complexes and similar densities of jobs and so on.
Yeah. I want to emphasize one more time that with this question box here, we are getting all of them. We are saving all of these, and we're going to have them as part of your formal feedback in this process. So if we don't call it out specifically, it's still going to be something that we have, and we'll be reading through these even more after the meeting and thinking about these. But again, Mr. Lopez brought up gentrification and how that dislocation or relocation of residents that tends to push them out into the surrounding areas, into more of the single family neighborhoods. So again, hitting on that theme. Let's go to the last three here. So 3 more. We have collaborate, support, and sustainability / climate. So once again, are any of these in your top 4 of the 8? Your top half? Highest priorities? They're all priorities, but highest priorities. Do you agree with these? And what's missing? So is there, once again, is there a topic missing? Is there some nuance here under the goals that's missing? Amanda said safety and the perception of safety are also important for generating ridership. Martin Silverman said in terms of missing, transit plan should directly support comprehensive plans. So the city is updating their comprehensive plan now, and I believe Albemarle County will be beginning that process of updating their comprehensive plan soon. Those plans, he says, should themselves encourage higher density housing. Jessica mentioned support as a priority. Peter Krebs says support. The job is to set people up to live their best lives. Yeah, definitely. Mr. Lopez says sustainability and climate, that's definitely a high priority. get better ridership, higher ridership, more efficiency, help out with the environment. We'll just give it a couple more moments here. And if we go to the next slide, please don't let that hinder you from continuing to use that question box there to enter in comments, feedback, other questions for us. I'm going to move to the next slide, but again, don't let that stop you from using that here. All right. So meeting debrief. Tim, is meeting debrief you or Scudder?
I think it was Scudder, but I think it's probably just a group effort. Kind of trying to keep up with the comments coming in. It does sound like enhance is clearly one of the top goals that we've seen. Sort of on this last round of comments, the collaboration and sustainability also high on those last couple of goals that we're talking about. And then equity, I think those could probably be unscientifically, looks like might be the top four there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, again, we want to encourage folks to. I want to once again give a plug for the survey. It is still open. I think we've had some good responses so far, a good response rate, but that is really the area we hope you are getting a lot from this presentation and the discussion we'll have in just a moment, and then we'll hope that you'll visit the survey if you haven't already, and please use that as a way to continue to provide feedback.
Yeah, I would say my takeaway from the comments that we've seen is likewise from Tim. Enhance, very high priority. It seems sustainability and climate sounds like it's a widely shared goal amongst the community that has responded here this evening. Those two in particular strongly suggest investment in higher frequency service in the busiest places as a high priority here. Not the only priority, of course, but a high priority, it sounds like. And definitely hear some thoughtful feedback about things like safety, perception of safety, as well as the pure safety of the vehicles and themselves and the drivers and operators and so on. And also, a thoughtful comment about a certain someone I think mentioning thinking about number of riders served, not just total number of rides, reflecting to some degree a need to consider that, which is asking in a way to think a bit more about coverage goals, in part to have a certain sort of critical mass of people who are served to ensure that we have buy-in from a large portion of the community, which is another factor to think that pulls us in a bit of a coverage direction. Because even if you don't ride transit very often, you may feel a certain valuable insurance policy, and also a certain value of I'm getting something for the community's investment in transit. Even if I'm not using it today, I might use it, in the future if I can't drive, 10 years from now, for example. So there's a certain critical mass of coverage that can be valuable for getting buy-in from the community. So very thoughtful comments here on a number of fronts. And I would welcome as well PDC staff or others from the panel jumping in and providing any thoughts of things we may have not noticed.
This is Christine. I was just going to see if there's anybody that wanted to unmute and give a comment or a question that they weren't able to put in the chat box. I wasn't sure if that was coming next, but it might be.
I was going to say I did see two raised hands as I'm just looking at that. Good point.
We've got Gregory Weaver has his hand up. I'm going to unmute you, Gregory. Looks like you're self-muted.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yes, we can.
Thanks. This is going to be a little long, so I apologize. But
Yeah,
my greatest concern with this conversation, and one of my main concerns with the survey when I was taking it, was that there's no real, substantial mention of climate change and our goals for transit surrounding that. I appreciate Scudder's answer on rail not really working for Seaville at the moment. When we're talking 10 to 20 years in the future, especially considering the changes that we're anticipating in the city with the passage of the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, the city and its surrounding area will no doubt be much denser in that time frame. But also when we consider the timer that we're on to eliminate emissions, we have to think transformationally. I think we should be making rail happen now if at all possible, because what we need to do ultimately is eliminate dependence on single family vehicles. We can't do that for the city, and especially can't do that for the county with just an excellent bus system. Love buses. I think that's an important part of the plan, but I think it's got to be multimodal with rails and buses working in tandem. And also, you all probably know this, we're seeing our working class neighbors continue to get pushed out further in the county due to the affordability issues in the city. And so emissions are going to get even worse. Transportation accounts for something like 26% of the city's emissions and nearly half of the county's. And that's going to get worse as more people have to commute from the county. So I don't see how we can curb that significantly unless we invest in the rail system. And then it's the lowest hanging fruit that I'm thinking of is rail down 29 that transports all those workers that are just this huge congestion, and more people are being forced to commute down 29. So carrying all those workers by rail is something that seems like it would help curb that pretty significantly. And then finally, I just want to comment on the climate goal. Again, it says minimize impact of the region's transportation system, which is definitely important. I know C3 has recommended electrifying the fleet, which we have to do, but also I think it should be reworded to reflect actual climate goals of eliminating emissions. And I just want to also thank you all for this and for all this work.
Yeah, thank you, Gregory. Mr. Lopez still had his hand up. Let me unmute you. Make sure you can talk.
Oh, I didn't realize that I had the hand up, but thank you. And thank you for Gregory for mentioning our C3 goal. By the way, I'm with C3, the Community Climate Collaborative. And one thing that since I had my hands up, why not mention, one thing that I think must be said when it relates with equity. And recently I was reading an article talking about some sort of racism in transportation planning and etc. and how can we address that and how can we make it more inclusive and more equitable in a certain way. So it talks about the planning process and the decision-making process. So it goes a little bit beyond what is how the routes are designed, what type of bus stops we have. All of that is very important, but also including community members' input in every step of decision making, right? Especially when we're talking about important decision making, important studies, and etc. And my experience so far is that many decisions, many studies, many plannings happening related to transit. Here, I'm not talking about the RTP. The RTP is very transparent. It's excellent the way they do their things. But I'm talking about individual agencies. It's very difficult for you to have access to what they're planning to do, what they're studying, until they have a final draft of what they're planning to do. And then they show with a very limited period of time for public engagement, with a very limited effort for actually receiving public engagement. It's kind of, all right, public engagement done, check. And not really kind of, what would you like to see happening? What you're doing right now, right? I know that what you're doing right now involves lots of efforts, and that many departments of our government struggle with lack of staff, lack of resources. But I think that this is definitely something to be considered if we are talking about more actable transit, a more actable vision for our transit system. It's not only about the physical elements, it's also about how we're moving forward and adjusting to decisions over time.
Okay. Great points, and thank you. Thank you. Okay. I don't see any hands up right now, but please do, if you'd like to expand on something you said in the questions. Again, with that question, responses, we have all those and we are recording them. But we do have Peter Krebs here. So Peter, I'm gonna unmute you. You have to, looks like you're self-muted, so you have to unmute yourself. Little button.
Okay, thank you. It took me a second to unmute there. What goes around comes around.
Yeah,
one of the things that we're in the Move to Health Equity Coalition, we're working on a mobility survey that we hope to share data that could inform this. And one of the members of the team raised a really important point that I just want you guys to think about going forward, that the community engagement process is it's sort of a two-way street. And in some ways, I don't want to use a loaded term, but in some ways we're drawing wisdom from the community, right, when we're doing a survey. But it's also an opportunity to sort of educate and empower. So this discussion that you guys have gone through with us about the trade-offs and, you know, what you maximize or whatever, and then what are the implications, I would really encourage, as you work forward and, you know, hopefully talk to a larger number of people, be thinking about your ability to convert people from not thinking that much about transit or not being that deeply involved to being really empowered influencers by giving some good you know, basic information. And the survey does some of that, where you're like talking about like you know, more frequency means like a shorter wait time or whatever. But yeah, I think what was happening here was good, and I'd love to see it really widely shared. So I guess that's my point.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. I certainly agree that a quality public engagement process on any kind of work like this is precisely a process of helping people understand the problem and issue that we're trying to solve and address, and how their values and priorities can be raised up from the technical side and from the value side. Glad to hear that we've helped clarify some of that tonight, and I hope we continue to do so through this process.
We're getting close to our end time, but that doesn't mean we can't take another comment if you want to clarify something you've said in the questions, or something you think has been unsaid, let's be expanded on. Okay, well, let's just Tim, if you want to hit on next steps, and we'll give another plug for the survey.
Yes.
Yeah, just check back on the hand raising.
The project website, again, the link right there, the tiny URL tinyurl.com/transitvision. There we have the survey up. The survey will be open through the end of the year. So if you haven't taken it yet, please take it. Please share it amongst your professional network and your networks, but professionally and friends and family. Our next step is, we're going to digest what we've heard today, what we've heard from the stakeholders last month, and we're going to start crafting our draft vision statement. So, really putting those goals together into a cohesive statement with some clear objectives that we hope to sort of measure with our transit vision. And then we'll also start getting into sort of our transit analysis and really start developing our recommendations. And then I think sometime in the spring and fall, or spring and summer, we'll come back and represent some of our recommendations again to the stakeholders and to the public. Keep up with our updates on the website again, tinyurl.com/transitvision. There is, if there's anything else that you maybe forgot to say during our meeting here, there is a comment feedback form on the website. So that does come to us, so we'll be able to see any questions or comments that you might have, and we'll incorporate those into our next steps here.
Great.
And with that, I would like to thank everyone, the panelists, the public, for coming tonight. And we are right at 8 o'clock, so I think meeting adjourned. Christine, would you like to do the closing?
I was just typing one into the chat box, so you're saving me a minute. I would love to say a sincere thank you again to everybody on our consulting team, members of the public, partners in the community. A robust and strong and useful regional transit vision is not any good if we don't have robust feedback and vision from the community members. So thank you very much for your time and your lived experience and helping guide us through this process. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Take care.